Hello, everyone, at least everyone who's actually here in front of their screen and not outside chasing the eclipse that you may or may not see. Welcome to Monday, we're on the 8th, right? The 8th of April, 2024, and this edition of the Presence Posse Presents, and we will be presenting Presence and, what did we call it? Presence and the Eclipse of Eternal Illumination. And that sounds right away really like, ooh, what does that mean? And we have with us Bobby Cobb, Jan Hart, and Miriam Siegel, which is me. So if you're here watching us, go away, go chase your moon and sun. I'm kidding. Stay with us because we're going to be talking about it anyway. So one of the questions that we actually wrote in the event text was, are you ready to keep your love light shining even when the shadows loom large? And that was written by our ever magical Wizard of Cobb. And straight to you, Bobby. And what did you mean and why did you choose to write that?
Well, that's a metaphor that I use a lot in working with people when I'm sharing the message and helping them navigate their own journey. That it's good to recognize that the sun is always shining, even if you're in the totality of the eclipse today. The sun is still doing its thing. Even when it's nighttime and the earth has turned in a direction that doesn't allow us to see the sun, it is still shining. And I love the metaphor of if you've ever taken off in a storm. I used to have to travel on business a lot, so that was a somewhat frequent occurrence where it's raining outside, it's cloudy, you can't even really see the sun, it looks like dusk. And we take off and the raindrops are just going by us out the window. But then as we finally break through that cloud cover, we're greeted with this field of endless cotton that just seems to go on because the clouds from the top are bright, bright white. The clouds from the bottom are dark and can look kind of menacing. And the difference is merely our perspective. When we have the perspective of being on the ground, we see the shadows, but that doesn't change the truth that the sun is shining. The skies are bright. We just have to get higher up in the atmosphere to be able to appreciate that. And I think that's true of us, our relationship, to the degree that you want to call it a relationship, with awareness or consciousness or our authentic self or whatever label that we want to give this animating energy that allows all of this to happen. It never stops shining, but very often our emotional moods or our temporary mindset makes it seem as if the light has gone out. Just so I thought that played well into the eclipse event that is capturing so much of everybody's imagination today.
Beautiful. Thank you. I'm actually going to jump in here before I go to Jan. I don't usually do that, but I'm going to do it this time. Because of what I heard you say, my mind went to a conversation I had with Danielle yesterday, actually. And she was talking about, and we've had this on the Presence Posse, this idea of being broken or not being broken. And the idea of experiencing pain, grief, fear, these kinds of things, and then having physical symptoms which seem to be connected to the emotional situation, the emotional state. So we do know, for example, research will show that cancer can be caused by excessive stress. And one of the things that we were talking about was people who have experienced devastating loss. That's the official term for it, devastating loss, where they have so much grief, they develop heart conditions. They end up with heart problems. And I sort of think when I hear you speak and I think about that, the idea of you not being broken, like your, as Fred would call it, your true self not being broken, us being, as Pema Chodron would say, the sky and everything else, weather, or as you say, the sun is always shining. It may not feel like that. And those kind of dark clouds can actually impact us quite strongly and quite physically, actually. And how learning to become present to ourselves, our true selves, to call it that, practicing presence can be an opportunity to just let the weather happen, let the feelings just move and experiencing them without trying to stop them, but allowing them to move as if they are clouds in front of the sun, knowing that we are the sun or knowing that we are the sky, may be conducive to releasing this experience of brokenness, like brokenheartedness or broken psyche. I mean, we can break our ankle, we can break our psyche, but it doesn't mean we're broken. So as you say, the sun is still shining, even behind the clouds and all of the different kinds of clouds. I just wanted to bring that in before I went on to Jan. Hi, Jan.
Hello.
Nice to see you. I know you got a warning. You knew I was going to come to you sooner.
I did. I didn't realize you were quite finished, though.
Oh, dear. Well, I can try and make something up, or I can do a typical presence thing. And how does that make you feel? I'm just kidding. I'm not going to.
That's okay. I can go. I was enjoying listening to you, Miriam and
Thank you.
Bobby. I missed you guys. I haven't seen you in a few weeks.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
really
we miss
nice.
you.
To have you.
We were talking about that when we saw your visage pop up on the backstage. It's like, oh God, Jan's here! Yay!
Cool. We're all back together. But it's so interesting, Bobby. We've just gone through a major storm here this weekend, and it's been, weather warnings, rain and wind and flooding and God only knows what. But a friend of mine was traveling from the UK back home during the storm, and he posted a picture of what you just described to
From above
remind
it.
from above it. Yeah, yeah. And he was like, "This is still here." So yeah, that's gorgeous, and as well what Miriam was saying, and it's a few things. I suppose when you were speaking, Bobby, it reminded me of a model that I sometimes share with people, and it's very simple. I have it here. It's called an impact elevator,
Mhm.
and it's a model that I got from Jamie Smart. And basically, we have all of our emotions, from the lowest to highest. And, talking about different levels of consciousness and, what that means. And it's not that there's a place to get to, it's just understanding that we go up and down this elevator all day long. And I like to speak about it in terms of, if you're down here in depression or hopelessness or apathy, then it's like being at the front door of a skyscraper, on the ground floor at the front door, and that's your view. In a big city, all you can see is concrete everywhere. But when your consciousness rises and you travel up the elevator, and you might go to the roof of that skyscraper, and when you're happy and you're feeling love and all those things, you now have the view from the roof of that building, of the skyscraper, and it's just a different perspective. But, you know, and that's what changes when we drop into lower levels of consciousness. But so what? You know, if we understand what's going on, it's temporary, it's impersonal, it's neutral, it'll pass. It's weather, you know, as you were saying. And I just it hit me very hard when I first came across it, because I think I had been striving to maybe transcend being human and just live a spiritual life, and you know, made me realize like it's all of it. It's not either or. It's human and spiritual. It's the whole package. And if all I wanted was to be at the top of the elevator all the time, I'd have stayed where I was, and I wouldn't have come into this human form, because that's what we came for, was the contrast. And I love what you were saying, Miriam, about the presence, and you know, developing our presence and our awareness so we can understand and see what's going on, and allowing it. You know, you don't have to love it all the time, but allow it. You know, you don't have to get rid of it or change it, as you were saying, Miriam. And you know, I often talk about being a rainbow, and you know, a rainbow is every color in the spectrum. But if I look at a rainbow and say, well, I don't like purple much, not a fan of red or green, so you can keep those. I'll take the yellow and the orange and the pink and I'll be happy. It's not a rainbow anymore. And our conditioning has been, you know, that pleasure is good and pain is bad. And if all we want to do is eliminate what we don't like or what's uncomfortable or what we wish wasn't there, then we're limiting ourselves in terms of being fully alive and having the full spiritual being, having that human experience. If we don't want all of it, then are we fully human? Are we allowing ourselves to be fully human? You know, it's all okay. It's all just weather, all just colors in a rainbow. And if we can develop our awareness to a point where we can, at least some of the time, see what's going on and be able to say, so what? You know, if I'm on the bottom of the bottom floor of the elevator, then it's worth developing that muscle of presence and awareness, and it can make a big difference.
It's beautiful.
That was really beautiful. That you should do that as one of those little Facebook reels where people can just watch you saying that, you know, that does this endless loop thing.
I don't even know what I said now.
We're recording.
Thankfully, it's recorded.
Yeah. Good thing.
That reminds me of really shortly after we started this podcast, my dog passed away. And there were times that I think that for a couple of shows, I just was like, I'm not emotionally ready to be on the show. So I skipped a week or two. And then when I came back, I started to talk about it, and I still kind of teared up. It wasn't actually gone. But there was, like, she died in my arms. The vet came to my house and we put her to sleep, and I felt her last breath on my neck. Geez, this is now like 3 years ago. I'm still welling up. But there is a beauty in all of that. I mean, it hurt and I cried a lot and I thought I was over it. And somebody, her name was Daisy, somebody sent me this giant bouquet of daisies. I mean, it was the biggest bouquets. And I thought I was over it. And it was a friend of mine who sent it anonymously, but I was able to sleuth it out. And the moment that I got those, I'm like, wow, flowers, that's cool. And like, I was kind of, I don't know flowers real well. And I was kind of like, what are these? And I'm like, oh shit, they're daisies. And just whoosh, here it came again. And the funny thing was, those were, to a degree, at least in the past, I would have called those bad feelings. I would have labeled those bad, and I would have wanted to avoid them because men don't cry, and it's just a dog, and you'll get over it, and go get another puppy. And I didn't want to hear any of that stuff, although I know that that's all offered from love, but it really, it just created the ability to really go into those emotions and express them fully and get the release, and there was beauty and there was grace in
Yeah.
and I was sad, and you know, my girl and I, every time that it came up, we were hugging and it'll be okay, and you know, just kind of coping. But it was a very, very full experience of loss. And I would have said I felt like it allowed me to process the grieving, but just talking about it again brings it back up again. So who knows? And I don't know. And I don't necessarily think that it matters so much, that being present and being aware that this too shall pass, and just recognizing this is an ephemeral moment and a marking of a very beautiful relationship that I had with another
Yeah.
unique expression of consciousness
Yeah.
that was my little Daisy dog. And it just, I think the awareness that it's still there uh, changes things for us. Because just imagine, I mean, we know it's coming. We know where we're going to get 100% and where to stand to see it. Science tells us all of that. But you can imagine, turn the clock back 300 or 400 or 500 years, and there will still probably be lots of people that think the sun god is mad at us and this is over and the world is coming to an end, and just the mental machinations and those feelings taking over our experience, compared to today, where now where people are driving and flying to it to be fully into the experience, and they will be entering into that experience without any fear because they know the truth. They're grounded in the truth that this is a really, really cool experience, and just take it for the experience. And now we look at it, it's like a beautiful and rare thing to be cherished and chased. And you know, used to be that it was something to be feared and wondered what was wrong with the world. And having that knowledge that our sun, our inner light, our love light is always shining, and it's easy to replenish it. We've got a ceremony going on tonight at the Adams Center. It happens to be new moon today, so it's the eclipse day, it's the new moon, and it's the first new moon of spring. And so we're doing a ceremony to just open our hearts and mind to that energy and play with it a little bit and see what shows up.
Yeah.
Wow, that's
And the
beautiful.
biggest eclipse of all seems to be the eclipse of our true nature.
Yeah.
And it's been eclipsed by our conditioning, our programming, culture, society. You know, there's so many layers
Wow.
to
You're on
that.
fire today, young lady.
I am. And that only just occurred to me as I said it. But ain't that the truth?
You've been eclipsed by the gods.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah,
I'm thinking
or
about
the idea of experiencing a personal emotional eclipse, that our, you know, the mask of our facade is going through the bright light of our true self, and it seems like a very dark time because the story isn't going the way we wanted the story
Yeah.
to go.
Yeah.
And we're overwrought because we're
Yeah.
not in the editor mode, we're in the participant or experiencer mode.
That's one of the things I've been noticing on social media that has been coming up in connection with this eclipse is claims of this being the time of the rapture, that the eclipse is the rapture. And it's kind of like there's that old I don't want to use any words that can be construed as being judgmental or anything like that, because I don't feel like that. But the only words that come to me are kind of like biblical, primitive, this sort of, when, as you were explaining, Bobby, the idea of eclipse being God's mad at us or something like that. And so this idea of the rapture coming and something horrible is going to happen, and but tomorrow is going to be way better, we'll have survived, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, all of these thoughts that the year 2000 and Y2K was coming, and then there are certain religions that predict the end of the world, and then it doesn't happen, and then they predict a new end of the world. Mm-hmm. It's interesting how we do that, how we don't seem to, I'm generalizing to like the human race, because I don't want to call anybody over, because it's just the way it is. There's nothing about it. It's just the way it is, that some people still equate large natural phenomena with some sort of catastrophic transformation of some sort. And I imagine way back when eclipses happened and they didn't understand what it was and thought that God was mad, people going blind because they looked straight at it, for example, without being able to explain it. I mean, that makes sense. If I look at an eclipse and I go blind, well, God must have been mad at me. I mean, as the explanation, because I don't know what else to think. Mm-hmm. I live in Norway. And speaking of storms, I mean, you go driving in the mountains here, and the fog and the incredible mystical feeling of things, like driving through these dark forests with fog and the strange lights. I get that they thought trolls were in the mountains. Mm-hmm. Right? Inexplicable things happening, and suddenly houses sliding down, or huge snow. What do you call them in English? I can't remember. But anyway,
avalanche.
Thank you very much. That's sort of, I was thinking of snow slides. No, that's not what it is. So even though we have scientific explanations for many natural phenomena, there still seems to be the need for a mystical connection to it. And I'm not discounting people who actually wasn't going to put that up yet, Bobby, but thanks for that, or whoever did it. That's okay. Oh, I lost my train of thought. So that's okay. It'll come back to me if it was important. The thing about the copy of the thing, I waited with it because I wanted to wait for a break so that I could ask Jan without sort of losing the thought. But it's good that you put it up, because now we can just ask it anyway.
Yeah, I'll have a look on Facebook and see. It's probably Rosalie. If it is, you can, Rosalie. I'll DM it to you. Yeah. Miriam, it's so interesting because there's also a big community out there in the astrological community who say, this is, the birthing of the new age of consciousness. And, that would say this eclipse is the time of the second coming, but it's not a person. It's awakening consciousness or raising consciousness or whatever. I heard somebody speaking over the weekend or yesterday about the earthquake in New Jersey, and so linking that to the eclipse and everything that's happening. And I don't know whether it is or it isn't, but it's just curious that there's these, different perspectives. Mm-hmm. But, we have 8 billion separate realities on this earth. So there's going to be a variety of perspectives.
Well said.
And it doesn't make any of them right or wrong or good or bad. They just, like you were saying, it just is.
Yeah.
So some people think it's, Armageddon and the end of the world, and other people think it's a new beginning and a new chance. And, maybe it is and maybe it isn't. We'll find out.
What we do with that. Because it's that as well. It's like whatever you perceive the reality to be, whether on the ground floor with the concrete or up on the top looking at, a very wide perspective.
Yeah.
How do you experience that, what you do with it, how it makes you feel, whether you let it go and just are present to every moment, if that's possible. But I mean, when I was a kid, I remember my aunt, she had high blood pressure, and she always knew when it was going to rain because her head would start to hurt. There would be a lot of pressure because things in nature do change when weather changes. So she would always go, I wish it would rain already, and inevitably did. And then she didn't have a headache. So she was kind of like our own weather report. She just always knew when it was going to rain. And so I think, an eclipse is a big natural thing. It's a big deal. Excuse me. And your point was actually where I was leading. So thank you for reminding me. It was like people talking about the energies. And a lot of times when there's a new moon or a full moon or whatever, some people will inevitably talk about energies. And some people say, oh, I'm really feeling it. And other people, I don't feel anything. And then there are the people that, oh, you're a quack. And the others like, oh, no, really, you just don't understand. You're not in touch with your body, whatever. Because we're all different perspectives and all different experiences. But it makes sense to me when there's a big natural phenomenon. The moon is blocking the sun out completely. Something's got to happen. Maybe not, but it makes sense to me anyway, in the way that my aunt always knew that the rain was going to come, or she hoped it would, because it would make her headache stop. So, and I have no idea. I can't say whether, I had a nap this afternoon, if that was because of the eclipse or because I just didn't sleep well. And if I didn't sleep well because of the eclipse, do you know what I mean? I can't be certain of that. I could make a conscious connection and decide that this happened because of this, but I don't know. I don't know unless I know. And I can be open to the possibility, because does it hurt? No. If for people who during Y2K, I remember we were all sort of, or many people were hoarding. I think that we'd say hoarding food, buying, canned goods and sort of stocking up just in case, because we don't know. Right. So, but if it's really, really destroying your life because you're overwhelmed by fear because of the eclipse or something like that, well, maybe you need to talk to somebody. Or maybe you just need to have that experience to decide that when you're on the other side of it and you're still okay, you're still okay. So there's no judgment. It's just, what is your experience? What is going on in your mind? What is your mind attaching to this phenomenon? And what does that stir up in you, or what arises in you, as I understand you would say, Bobby? Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I've been asking people recently, and I will probably incorporate this into my coaching. I'm just like, what's the story that you have to be telling yourself in order for this event to make you feel the way that you are feeling right now? And I find that's an interesting, psychologically, we have to step outside of ourselves to be able to analyze what is the story. So it creates a little bit of dissociation from the experience. But it also, as a coach and a hypnotherapist, it also unpacks their belief structure as to how they got there. And very often my second question to them is, now looking at that story and saying it out loud, does it even make any sense to you? And that's, kind of asking them in a way to look for the things that really don't follow logically. So it begins the process of deconstructing that whole set of beliefs that are built into that story. And it's led down some very interesting conversational rabbit holes that I've really enjoyed exploring. And I've only done it, I've just started doing it within the past couple of weeks, phrasing it exactly that way. But we tell ourselves, and the eclipse is a great thing for that, because the stories that we are telling ourselves about it today are very different from the stories that people would have been telling themselves about 3 or 5 or 900 years ago. The stories would be very different. And the thing that you said earlier, Miriam, about, what would we logically conclude that if a third of the population that witnessed this event is now blind, 2 weeks later, and suddenly this mass blindness has came, you would assume that there is a perhaps an evil entity or an evil power or an angry benevolent power who's like gotten really, really pissed off at us, and that would just be the only conclusion. And also recognizing, I think, that our mind is really good at making associations, finding patterns, recognizing patterns, and then rationalizing all of those facts into a story that is retellable. That is like our both our superpower and our greatest weakness as a species. I would submit to the panel.
Well, I mean, it's a safety net, being able to explain to ourselves the seemingly inexplicable, because it helps us survive the way we would understand it. And again, to use that word primitive without it being a judgment, primitively, this is how I survive, this is how I live my best life, is by explaining inexplicable phenomena to protect myself. And preempting next week's topic, where we're going to dive into living with the question and the idea of not knowing and being okay with not knowing, like present to not knowing. That is something that I would, what claim am I going to make? This idea of understanding the safety in not knowing and not explaining, not using our mind to create something for us, and just allowing it to be the way it is and still experiencing the safety in that. That's a pretty good presence practice.
That is.
Yeah, it's a pretty important presence practice, actually. And I love the way the questions you asked, and it's similar to the way I work with people. It is noticing what your mind is doing while you sit in a chair in a room with just me and nothing is happening other than that, right? So the feeling of danger is not the same as the situation. And having that, what I would label as positive dissociation, right? You mentioned dissociation. Positive dissociation is detaching is another word for it, from the mind's narrative that is creating this experience, and then realizing and noticing and being able to be present to, but I'm fine. It's all smoke and mirrors. It's the clouds. And it's very important to have that, or train that ability to take that step back and, okay, what I feel like is happening, what I think is happening, isn't what's happening. Yeah.
I'm really glad you came back to that, Miriam, because I wanted to come full circle on that one. I think you might have even posted on this recently, Bobby. It still looks like the sun rises and sets every day. We know it doesn't, but it still looks like that. And I think it's just a great example of how, don't believe everything you think or everything you see, even if it looks like logic. When I'm working with people, one of the questions I like to ask is, for instance, if somebody was fearful over the last few days about this upcoming eclipse, and if maybe some of the people you spoke about, Miriam, who think something awful is going to happen, a question I might ask is, does it look to you like this upcoming event is sending back these feelings and putting them in your body now?
Wow. Say that again. I love that.
And I'll tell you, it's another Jamie Smart one. Does it look to you like this upcoming event is sending back the emotion you're feeling and putting it in your body now? It's just the ridiculousness.
That is so brilliant.
It's a pattern interrupt, I guess, of sorts.
Yeah.
But it just, people can go, yes. And and then we can come back to have a conversation about what's known and what's unknown, and how to navigate all that. Because the unknown can be fearful if we don't understand who we are at our true nature and how we create experience. But once we understand that, we know one thing for sure. We know how we're built, and we know we're designed to deal with whatever comes up. If we're in presence and awareness, we can navigate it more easily. But we know for sure that as our spiritual nature, our common sense, and our wisdom will guide us every moment, and will give us everything we need in every moment. So we don't have to be concerned about living in the unknown. We've been living in the unknown our entire lives. But we freak out when there's something that we don't know about, some of us, some of the time. I speak for myself. But like, I've really come to trust that, whatever curveball I'm thrown or whatever happens in life, I will know in whatever moment what to do. I'll always know the next step. If I can get out of my head and just relax and settle back into this present moment and listen deeply to my true self, I get the guidance, the nudge, the prompt, whatever it is I need. And that's so helpful in terms of navigating the unknown, to know that that's there and that we can trust it. It doesn't ever go away. It's like the bloody sat nav telling you to turn around, like, it just doesn't go away. and thank goodness it doesn't. So,
But it can send you wrong.
yeah, there is a lot of unknown, but when we know that, more than even believe it, but know it, know who we are, we can trust that. But it takes presence practice to get there.
I like thinking of the knowing that you are describing as an embodied knowing, that we know it in the fiber of our being. We know it on our cellular level. Our gut, when we see something, it gives us very, very clear guidance of what is going to happen next, as distinguished from an intellectual understanding. And I use one of my favorite quotes is Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. No French accent present. And he's the one who came up with we're not human beings that have occasional spiritual experiences, rather spiritual beings having the human experience. And pretty much everyone that hears that, if they hear that for the first time, they're taken by it. They connect to it and like, ooh, I like that. Yeah, I can see that. There's some truth in that. And that's the intellectual understanding of it. But on people who are in a spiritual path, there may come to the point in their journey when they take that on as an embodied understanding, not as a description of how life happens, but a prescription of how we live life, which to me is exactly what we've been talking about today. It is the understanding that we are being, and you can imagine, what did your face look like before you were born? And start to play with that. What do you think happens after you die? And, lots of different traditions have lots of different explanations, but there's almost a universal sense that the end of our body and the end of our mind and the end of this vehicle, the user interface for the human experience, is not going to be the end of the body consciousness, that will do something, who knows what. That part is a mystery. But when you can act from that point, and you can sit with those feelings and say, wow, my mind is a tornado, like force 5 hurricane, and it is just really sitting here, and yet I know I'm sitting in my living room on my chair. I've got tea with me, and I'm safe and secure and warm. But in here, man, things are really swirling. And, then you have the option to be able to give yourself permission to say, let's just go with this, go all in and see what happens. And knowing that you're going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
On the deepest level, you're going to be okay.
Yep. Yep. The last few months, maybe it's half a year, even more, I have been doing a few new, trying out a few new systems just to have the experience. One of them was introduced to me by a former Presence Posse member, Sadhu. And Sadhu introduced me to the positive intelligence quotient, or PQ. And we did a short, some of us did a short sort of course on that. And now I'm doing Mastering the Brain Game with the other Presence Posse member, Danielle McMahon. And that also has a system. So it's like systems for what kind of mirrors we have, or what kind of thoughts and experiences we have. And the positive intelligence quotient is also a sort of a system for it. You label your thoughts. So it's the judge or the saboteur or whatever. And I found that both of those things are very interesting. But for me, it complicated things, because for me, it's a thought. So it's interesting to, it's a judgmental thought, or it's a saboteur thought, or it's a persecution thought, or whatever kind of thought. It's an interesting, as you say, I can go into it and I can learn something. But most often for me, it's just, this is a thought. And then, am I believing this thought? Because if I'm believing the thought, if I'm making it true, then I feel something related to whatever that thought is. Like telling myself, I don't know, if I don't make something up. I tell myself, I actually said to somebody the other day, I'm fat. And to me, that's just it's just a description, right? It's just a word. It's not a judgment on me. Doesn't mean I'm a bad person or anything like that. I'm just fat. The person's reaction was very interesting, trying to get me to not be mean to myself. And no, I'm just actually describing being overweight, or like using a word that is basically I'm overweight. And I mean, I'm not, but it doesn't matter. It's just, okay, I'm fat. I didn't have to believe anything other than that as an empty description of a situation or a thing that I see, right? But I did notice the other person attaching things and then believing something about me. And it was really interesting how far this person was willing to take that. And my believing these things about myself that are horrible, which meant that I had psychological problems. It was just bizarre. And I'm like, my way of experiencing it is, well, I'm a bit overweight and the weight will come off when it comes off, and I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to give it a lot of energy or anything. It was just a statement. So I like to simplify. This doesn't mean that it isn't helpful to have the other labels, because it can reveal things about how I choose to see things, how I think, and how I experience. But I do notice that for me, the easiest thing and the quickest thing, it just happens on its own, is this is a thought. And then am I believing this thought? And if I am believing this thought, then I have another choice. Do I want to continue believing the thought, or do I let it go? And that can happen really, really, like in a few seconds, it's just gone. So I just wanted to bring that up, as since we're talking about this idea of being present and still being okay. We can even, I mean, I've had this been in situations where the thought is, I'm going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And then getting really present. I'm not dead now. Right? I can't know. I don't need to time travel. I am not dead now. And what has happened to me then is I notice what's going on and I act, as you say, Jan, according to what is happening now. And I can make good decisions, at least the best ones I can, in that kind of situation. And then afterwards, if I need to, I can have a look at that. Okay, that thought showed up. What was that about? What kind of experience did I have that maybe reminded me of the one I had now? Is that the same experience? No, it is not. So I can let it go. Like, there's just ways of doing that. But I think it's a helpful question. I imagine Fred would say, Byron Katie would say, is this true? My way of doing it is I like to ask, do I believe the thought?
So interesting. I mean, it doesn't really matter how we do it as long as it's helpful to us. My version, what comes up for me is the way you're using the gift of thought right now, Jen, is making you feel like this. Is this how you want to feel? It's not that I'm planning to think that that's what comes up.
Yeah.
And everybody will have their own way of doing it, and everybody's own wisdom will throw up the right way, the most helpful way for them. And, I think it's not to get hung up on being prescriptive. Everybody has their own wisdom, and the right way will emerge if you practice the present.
Yeah. It's what's good for the goose isn't necessarily good for the gander. And as long, it's like my thing, whatever works, right?
All flavors, all flavors.
And as far as I know, none of us grew up having learned that. This is things we have learned as we have lived our lives, right? I mean, Bobby, you weren't taught your witnessing or your presence practice when you were a kid, or were you? No. Yeah. So I think if I speak for myself, I'm a living testament. If you had known me before, and I say this a lot and people go, really? I was such a different person. I was such an angry person and a hurt person. And it's like, okay, you do realize that you are the one interpreting that situation. You are the one making those thoughts, and you can actually make other thoughts or leave thoughts out of it entirely and just be and notice that you're fine and that you don't need all of that thoughts. I didn't know that when I was younger. It took me a while to learn it. And then it took me a while to practice it. Yeah. And often, as like you mentioned, Bobby, the embodiment of it. It's like my body, there's nothing happening here. My body's fine. And even if I feel pain, it's okay. It can be really cool to feel pain, actually, if I'm just present to it and not resisting it and making it worse, potentially. It's like, okay, these sensations are really, really interesting. There's a reason why we can walk barefoot on burning coals, which I've done, and not be burned. We don't have to necessarily experience pain when something is going on in our bodies. The presence of it.
Yeah, you mentioned something earlier about Sadhu's technique and another technique that you mentioned, and those techniques can become things, they can become rituals, and we can begin to believe that we're only able to get to a certain level of awareness through the ritual. And I like to think of those rituals as useful in a context, useful in a certain part of your journey, This weekend I have been getting rid of all of my winter hiking gear that I have. I'm putting away my crampons and my cleats and all of this stuff that I might use while there's snow on the ground. And I'm bringing out all of the other things that I'll be using next week when all of the snow has melted. And there are stages in our life that certain rituals can be really beneficial because they can interrupt patterns. And we've mentioned that a couple of times on today's call already. And, that's what that now with what Sadhu has offered you as that way of looking at your PEQ or whatever it is that he's, or PIQ, pick. You're, and for you going through that, it just kind of felt like an extra step. You're sitting here noticing, wow, my brain's really active. And that particular technique happens to put more thinking on top of already active thinking, but it allows you to manipulate it a little bit. But if you're in a stage, a state of being where you're already pretty calm and suddenly the thoughts arise, maybe you can just sit and experience and not have to do anything with those. Or wisdom may also whisper to you in the form of some uncomfortable thinking around that. And you may say, this is the perfect time for Sadhu's little technique here to go and begin to play around with that type of energy too. You mentioned Jamie with the chart that he created, and one of the things that I've borrowed from him is he talks about his process being fiercely reductive, that he's taking away all of the things. And I feel like, to the degree that I've borrowed some of his stuff, that's very much been incorporated into my work as well, that most of the time reducing and just letting things pass is the path to go. But sometimes it's good to have an interrupt. I've got that little technique where I suggest that we set a clock and just check in with ourselves during periods of emotional turmoil. And one of the benefits of doing that is recognizing we may think that, oh my God, this was the week from hell. There wasn't a moment during this week where I felt good. That's false, because if you look back, you'll be able to see that there were times, and that little technique shows that to you. And it may be that grief or turmoil or frustration or whatever was the dominant emotion. It may have been the theme of the week, but there are going to be times in that week where that alarm might have gone off and you go, the eye of the storm, bliss. May not last, but it's here right now. And it just helps us to shift perspective, like taking that elevator up a few floors, get off at the observation deck on the 10th floor and see how things look. And if that's not the view that you like, go all the way to the top and look at it from there. And 60 floors or however many in between that we could also experience.
And if we didn't try to push the ones we didn't like away so much, they could become more familiar to us and become a bit more comfortable. And then it would be easier to welcome them. So it might be helpful to get out at every floor and spend a little time and get used to all the perspectives.
Yeah. One of us said earlier, detached, you're feeling detached. And it's interesting to play around with for me anyway, to play around with the idea of detachment. To me, that's something that I'm shifting aside, and the energy inside my head feels very different if I think of non-attached. And that feels like I'm allowing it to come in to ebb and flow, and that I'm fully experiencing it. It's kind of like sitting on the seashore and allowing the waves to come up and tickle your feet. That's non-attached to your feet getting wet. And for me, it feels like detached is, oh, I don't want my feet to get wet. I'm going to move a little bit further up the beach where the waves don't quite go. I don't know if that's your guys' experience or not, but just.
I think it's Byron Katie says, feel the emotion, don't become the emotion. That's what comes to mind when you're speaking, Bobby. Allow it in, have the full sensory experience of it, but it's still not you.
Yeah, there's a quote that I like from Shunryu Suzuki, who is it's passed away now, but he was a great Zen master, and he said, "Open your heart and open your mind. Allow your emotions to freely come and go. Just don't serve them tea." Don't engage with them. Just allow them to be here. Allow them to be the waves that ebb and flow, and appreciate them for what they are. Perhaps just don't feel the need to necessarily engage with them, or get to the point where, like what I was doing with Daisy, was recognizing that these emotions were overwhelming and just surrendering to the overwhelm, and just make the conscious decision. I knew this day was coming, and I'm just going to experience it as fully as I possibly can. And for me, that involved not working for a couple of days, because I was kind of, I was in the emotions for sure.
Yeah, you were grieving. Yeah. And it's funny when you spoke earlier about you thought you were over it and the emotion is still coming up. But I heard a lovely, just a quote, I suppose, or a one-liner about grief, and it said, "We don't get over people. We learn to live with the pain and carry it with, and we carry them with us. We don't have to get over them."
I wouldn't want to.
Yeah, me either.
It lives
Because
in your
there's,
heart.
at least, especially the ones, I mean, I can differentiate if I want to, and I choose to do that right now just for the sake of the conversation. For the ones who I have experienced great love for, I wouldn't want to get over them because the love is there. My grief is also an expression of my love for them.
Of course it
So
is.
why would I want to get over? I don't. It's not like I want to. You are both using different ways of describing it. I usually say to people, I don't have to live there, right? So I don't have to be in grief all the time and be devoured by it, but feeling it and allowing it to flow and appreciating the essence of it is beautiful. And even you all know that I had quite a devastating experience about just over a year ago, a devastating loss, and it was an interesting experience to have been practicing mindfulness since I was like 9, and nothing helped. And just understanding that just be and feel it and allow it to be, and then it takes whatever time it takes, and then it dissipates, and which it does. And I'm still fine, and I'm still fine. I don't necessarily feel fine all the time, but it's not a prescription of my life and my future.
No.
It's just right now. So there
It's
is
good
even
to
beauty
honor
in
it.
that.
Yeah, and I think that's a lovely way for us to close, because we don't want to eclipse our emotions. They just want to be expressed. They just want to be allowed to come up and be processed and experienced, and then go. And the waves will come when they come, and you just got to allow them and be with them. That's the fastest and easiest way through to the other side. But eclipsing them, unfortunately, keeps them in the system, and can be a much more difficult ride.
That's the first line of the little ditty that I love so much. What we resist will persist.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it's so true. I mean, and the analogy, I think I may have stolen this from Jamie too, the of holding a volleyball or a soccer ball underneath the water. It's something that you can do, and you can do it easily, right up until you can't. And there you lose your attention, and boom, it
God.
comes back to the surface.
Yep.
And I've been playing around with the idea of trauma, that it's maybe perhaps part of the beauty of the design, that some experiences that we have in the moment are overwhelming, are more than we can process that in the moment. Our physical body will sometimes go into shock, and you're just sitting there, and you might say, what's wrong with that person? Well, they're in shock, and they won't stay there forever. And it seems like trauma, that it cocoons an experience and says, I know you're not ready for this right now. It'll be here when you are. And very often those folks, 7 or 8 years later, it's like wisdom then tells us, okay, you're ready to deal with this now. So this is your next little piece of work on your journey. And here it is again. And, that probably feels like to them that it's easy to look back from today all the way back to the initial sensitizing event, which occurred 17 and a half years ago or whatever, and realize you've been carrying this your whole life. And it feels like, this has been my constant companion, but kind of like that, that pattern interrupt. It hasn't been that. I mean, you haven't been focused on that for the last 17 and a half years. It comes up, but that's just wisdom saying, you ready to deal with this yet? Don't forget, still don't have to do it now. It's still left over. It's still fresh. You can put it right back in the fridge. And when you're ready to take a bite out of that, it'll still be here for you. And that's a story that I'm making up. But I am kind of rolling around, marinating the idea of, is that merely a feature, not a bug of the experience? It's not necessarily a problem to solve. It's part of the beauty of the design that allows us to continue to function, even though we've got this undealt trauma that we're still carrying until we decide it's time to set it down.
Exactly. And under the right circumstances where we feel safe enough and held enough to be able to bring that up and release it is often
huge.
Yeah, it's often the case. The circumstance is not necessarily having to do it on your own or carry it longer because you don't want to bother somebody else, for example. So we are at the end of our program, so we're not going to go more deeply into that. But of course, we're the Presence Posse, so we can always come back to this those kind of topics. To round off this lovely conversation about the eclipse of eternal illumination, do you have something that you would like people to know that you are offering? Bobby Cobb.
Yes, I do. I've been working on a book for a while. Turns out I'm still working on it. However, I have released about 175 pages of it in a Google document that is in the Presence Posse public group. So if you're interested in checking this out, it's available to read right now. And ultimately, when this is complete, it's really not going to be a book. There's not a good name for what I've created. It is a book, 175 pages and counting of written material. I've got an audiobook version of it, which I'm going to offer those in a combined, I think I've got the technology to do this, that when you grab it, you'll be grabbing both the audio and the written material. And my process of doing that was I recorded the written material, and that's me talking just like I talk with every meeting with every client on every Presence Posse. It's me talking about this stuff, but in a, you know, a linear, progressive fashion. And then it's been edited, and the editing is a little bit more of a, you know, it's taken out all of my folksiness, it's taken out my voice, and it's just a book. So when you read it and when you listen to it, it's two very different experiences, because it's not me reading the book. It's me sharing this material as I would with a client or a friend or a family member, or here on the podcast, in a much more conversational way. And I have got a guided hypnotic meditation contemplative trance to allow you to experience the same material through a different channel, speaking directly to the subconscious mind. So it's called a book. I don't know whatever it is, and I'm going to do videos as well. So it's going to be like some sort of multimedia experience that you can go through. But in the Presence Posse group and in the Mindful Life, our Mindful Life group, both on Facebook, the document is there that's got kind of all of the material. So if you like this stuff and you want to explore it, that does it in a linear fashion, where I start with where we are, and I start with the idea that our perception is not designed to show us reality. Our perception is designed to ensure survival of the human species. And from a spiritual point of view, that's not always showing us exactly what we need to see, but that's where we are, so that's where we start. And then through this experience, we start peeling back layers of the intimacy onion until the only thing left is our true, authentic self. And I will just say that this is the 5th book that I've written. It's the only one that I have ever written that I enjoy reading what I wrote, and that I enjoy listening to what I recorded. And I don't know what that means, but it is just it's a novel experience for me. And sometimes I'm like, ooh, this is really good, or ooh, I need to hear that audio right now. And so I'm checking it out. So that's available. The formal format, I've been promising for 3 weeks that it would be next week, and why not continue that trend? Next week, the multimedia book will be available, or not, but it'll be soon, and the print is available now.
Thank you very much, Bobby. Thank you very much. And you can find it in the Presence Posse group, so go there. Jan, what you got?
I don't know if anything as fancy as that, but I do have a couple of openings for coaching or mentoring. So if anybody would like to take that up, you know where to find me on Facebook or LinkedIn or on my website. Thank you, Miriam. How about you?
Thank you. I have also a few coaching spaces available, so you're more than welcome to contact me using the email or going to my website. And I am, for a short time, offering psychic mediumship and healing readings at half price.
What?
So if and I'm not a typical psychic medium and healer person, it's very deeply therapeutic usually. It's not the predictive kind of you're going to win the lottery and that sort of thing, generally speaking. It's more about what is the core essence of you and what's blocking you and standing in your way, for example, of the life you want to live. So half price for limited time, and you can contact me in the Presence Posse group or at this email address or my website where there's more information. So thank you all for a rousing roundtable talk, and we will be back next week. The Presence Posse will present Presence and Living the Question. And if you're not sure what we mean by that, join us next Monday, same time, same place, and you'll find out. And we look forward to hearing from you. Take care, everybody.
Happy eclipse.
Happy eclipse.
Ciao for